So I've talked to Dr. Bill for...
Bill, please.
What, just Bill?
Yeah.
All right, I call him Dr. Bill. So I've talked to Bill for many, many years, and it's my privilege to share the stage with him. He's going to make sort of a little bit more formal, but if you know Bill, he's not that formal, so he's going to make a little bit more formal remarks starting at 7, so we're going to kind of do a reset. But if you're here now, you get a little bit extra access. So there's a table down there also at the bottom right. There's some note cards. If you would like a question asked, feel free to go down at any time while we're talking. Don't take my cards. No, it's your bio, you know it. So if you want to ask a question, you go down there, fill it out. You can do it while we're chatting here. It's totally fine. Also, please, I have a note. Turn off or silence your phones, or else it goes into a Faraday cage. So if you could please do that now, thank you very much, and it'll spare us all some pain. So first, Dr. Bill was born in Millburn, New Jersey. We don't hold that against him, though. He earned his BA from Rider College, his master's and PhD at Purdue. He studied under the historian Gunther, is it Rothenberg or Rothenberg? Rothenberg, okay. He specialized in military history, the American Civil War, the history of technology. He's a professor of history and writing at Montreat College, along with a bunch of other stuff that keeps him busy. He is like a pilot. He's also the author of more than 50 books. And he is the official historian of the Beat Kaliner radio show, which is probably the most dubious of honors. In 2009, as you all know, right, he wrote his first book, the first book in the 4-part series now, the John Matherson series, right, called 1 Second After. Okay, I thought you guys would jump on that, but okay. And it landed on the New York Times bestseller list for 12 weeks. The sequel, 1 year after, released 2015. The third book, contemplated to be the final book of the trilogy, The Final Day. I thought that sounded like a nice novel.
I gave it that title to try and tell my publisher that's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
Message not received.
No.
All 3 of the books achieved New York Times bestseller status. And along the way, he kind of got dubbed the father of the prepper movement for inspiring people of all walks of life to recognize how thin the line is between an ordered society of abundance and apocalyptic scarcity. And now he has written his 4th book in the series 5 years later, and we'll talk more about that probably after 7 o'clock. But so for now, I want to go over a couple of topics. I got a lot of cards. I got a lot of topics.
Okay.
Before we start, I wrote Bill, I sent him a text, and I said, I want to know, like, what do you want to talk about? And he said, ask me anything. And I said, I would like your passwords, and I would like your social security number. And then his response did not seem like that was what he was giving me. I said, there's no numbers here, and there's only 4 letters. And I said, passwords are way longer than that.
No, it was only 2 letters.
Okay, that was 2. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so first question I had for you is, what books are you reading right now, if any?
Ooh. I so very rarely, usually I'm doing research, articles, everything else on what I'm writing about now. So it's been a while since, the last books I really read, just for the pleasure of it, was the O'Brien, Aubrey, and who knows what I'm talking about, the naval warfare, Napoleonic warfare. Master and Commander, yeah, that series, Aubrey and the other guy. So usually, though, it's I'm reading history or issues on technology. So that takes up most of my time.
Are there any post-apocalyptic books or movies that you enjoy?
I'll cite 2 or 3, and put your hands up if you've read them. Alas, Babylon. Good, quite a few of you. That's The Godfather. That was published in 1958, and it was just a stunning book then, and it was an inspiration for 1 Second After. I've often said 1 Second After is simply an updated version of Alas, Babylon. In 1958, it was about thermonuclear war. 21st century is about EMP. Another one not many people know about is called Earth Abides. Great book, written in the 40s. Just a remarkable study of ecologically what happens if you take man out of the equation. 99% of the human population dies, and what happens to the world around them across the next 50 years. Great book.
Here's another book that we talked about years ago. It is not as well known as the 1 Second After series, or the John Matheson series, but Pillar to the Sky. And I enjoyed our discussion about that book. I own the book, and I remember you talking about your interactions with the folks at NASA. And that was real, like that was the book that you got to do, right? That you wanted to do, and that was sort of the trade-off, right?
Yeah. 2-minute story. 3 minutes.
We have like half an hour.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My agent calls me up one day, and she's been a close friend for over 30 years, and she says, "I got this great opportunity. They want you to go to Goddard Space Flight Center to meet with some different people, spend several days there, see if you can cook up some ideas for some books in relationship to NASA." So she sold me on it until she said, "But Bill, there's one problem. You're going to have to pay for your own room and board." And I thought, that's pretty cheap. And she said, "Yeah, okay, I'll tell them to tear up the check. Let's just say the check was 6 figures." And I was just like, "No, wait a minute, I'll take the check, all right? I'll pay for my own room." So 3 months later, I'm at the Goddard Space Flight Center, and I got to meet the most incredible people working on different projects. It really was incredible. The Solar Observatory facilities there influenced my writing in the book 48 Hours. And a really neat hour or two with a bunch of exobiologists discussing what happens if there's ever contact. They wanted my intake and input as a science fiction writer, and we all came to the same conclusion. If the phone rings, don't pick it up. Don't let them know we're here. And you know the reason why is, look through history, almost every single case of 2 technology societies meeting, the one that's the superior technology will almost always in the end dominate. Yep. So it's like, just make believe we're not home. I had a wonderful time. I was down there, I think 3 times finally. And they were wonderful people. They really helped me out. It was a great book. I had a lot of fun with it.
Was that an idea that you had, or was that something that you learned, this Pillar to the Sky? Was that a technology that they discussed with you?
Well, I've always been intrigued by space elevators. The type of things that intrigue you in life. The idea is to actually to run a cable out to geosynchronous orbit, 23,000 miles out, anchor it at the equator, and the rotation of the Earth will keep the pillar rigid. And then you'd use that for moving supplies up and down at a fraction of the cost. I don't think it's viable now.
No.
Because we're putting so many satellites into low Earth orbit. And the other thing of it is, when I wrote Pillar to the Sky, the cost per pound to orbit low Earth orbit was about $2,500 to $3,000 a pound. So if you have an astronaut up there and he wants a Big Mac and fries, that's $3,000. But that's all changing. Musk is a great hero of mine. He has dropped the cost of spaceflight by a full magnitude. It's going to happen again when he gets Starship flying. We'll be looking at $30 to $40 a pound to orbit. So the capital investment in building a pillar would be at least $100 billion. Well, what's $100 billion today anymore? We throw that away like it's nothing. Mm-hmm. But where it might work quite well would be on the moon or Mars.
To connect it to what?
To connect it to the vehicles coming into lunar orbit. All they have to do is rendezvous with the top of the cable, offload their supplies, fly back. They don't have to spend the additional energy to go down, come back up. I think this could actually be real on Mars in 25 years.
So what I found interesting was about your meeting with the NASA people is something that I also remember from after 9/11 when remember Hollywood directors and writers were asked to meet with government officials to try to give them some insight or some idea to think outside of the box. Because far be it for me to suggest that people who work in government are kind of short-sighted on a lot of things, but they kind of are. And so like you bring in these creative types to kind of ask, like, what do you see this being useful for? Was that part of the discussion?
It started, and it's an interesting story in itself. My publisher approached NASA about 3 years before I finally got there with 3 other writers. It took him 3 years to get approval through NASA to bring 3 people onto their campus for 3 days. That's just how bureaucratically, written the space agency has become. But that was definitely a part of it, was get some people who think outside the box. I got some people thinking more about space elevators and such. And it was funny because when I first put the proposal up, they said it was too far-fetched. And then I just pulled out all the NASA studies from 10, 15 years earlier where they were testing this thing, and then they gave me the go-ahead. That was a long book. That was about 170,000 words. It was a long book to write to figure out all the orbital mechanics.
So from space to the dirt, I did not know this until I was kind of doing some prep for this. You're also an amateur archaeologist. Is this like some Indiana Jones kind of vision of self? It is, yeah. Okay, so 4 summers in Mongolia, working on the ruins of a 2,000-year-old city, trips to Russia and Romania, working on a Roman fortress. Roman fortress or Romanian fortress? Roman fortress.
Roman fortress, Port Lisum.
Okay.
On the Dacian border. Mongolia, 2 summers in Habalgus, which was an 8th century city near Karakorum, which you all know about, of course. And
I don't know about that.
And then 2 years of just going to Mongolia for the heck of it. My buddy and I would spend a month in the outback riding horses, drinking plenty of fermented horse milk and cheap vodka, boiled goat, boiled marmots. Time of my life. And then in Russia, we were surveying encampment sites of the Golden Horde in the 12th century until the KGB came along and arrested me.
How did that go?
Not good. I'm serious. I got arrested.
I'm sure it didn't. So you're here, so obviously all's well ends well. But
before we got there, we were the first Americans to go into the province of Saratov because it was once part of the base of their own space program. So, on the advice of our Russian coordinator, we paid all the appropriate bribes. You know, this group, that group, etc. But as near as we can figure out, the guy that was supposed to pay the bribe to the KGB, and now the FSS, drank it instead. And then our last day on site, they took us all away.
And?
I wound up in Lubyanka prison for 6 months. No. It was interesting. That's the only way I can explain it. It was kind
Did they interrogate you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What did they had that like? Did they have a translator, or was there somebody in English?
Yeah. They had somebody who could speak English. They were accusing of smuggling and different things. My favorite story of that is there I am standing naked. I'm serious. And interrogator on the other side of the table. And I finally just got tired. You don't like standing naked in front of people. So the pants were down at my ankles. They didn't do any searches. And I just looked at the guy, I looked at my money belt, and I pushed a couple $100 over, pulled him up, the money belt was gone. I mean, the money was gone. And so I've always been able to say since then, like, Humphrey Bogart, they gave the dirty screw a C note, he let me go. So I spent a day in a Russian prison. And I remember when I got home, my agent called me up. I was in the New York Times, and my agent was saying, why did you make it a cause celeb? Why did you give him the finger? Well, I did try to give him the finger at the very end, but the stewardess stopped me from doing that. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll make it a cause celeb. And I'll spend the next 6 months in jail. I want out. So a week after I got back, I get a call from the State Department. And the State Department says, we have your paperwork here. The Russians have changed their mind. They want you to be extradited back to the Soviet Union, well, Russia then. And you've been tried in absentia, and you've been found guilty, and you're going to spend 8 years in the Gulag. And considering who was in power, president back then, I half thought they were going to do it to me.
To send you back to...
Yeah, it was the Clinton years. They would have been glad to get rid of me. Then they explained, they said, no, we're not going to do that to you. You're okay. So, but it was 3 years later, I was going into the Slovak Republic, and I had some students with me, and they processed my students, and I came up, I handed my passport, and 2 minutes later, the guy is... And I finally said, is there a problem with Russia? And the guy said, yeah, they want you. And he looked at me, and finally he said, we hate the blanks. So tell them to go blank themselves. Don't worry about it. I'm letting you go. So that's my great adventure.
I'm glad I asked the follow-up questions. All right, so everyone obviously is here.
I spent too much time on that. Let's talk about the book.
Yeah, well, okay, well, I was going to get there. I was just about to say, Glenn Beck called it maybe one of the most important books you could read to understand what we are facing if we have an attack on the U.S. So along with government and private studies, you based your research on a congressional study, right? A 2004 study. And were you expecting that report to drop, or how did you become aware of the threat and then that report? What made you look for
Good
this
question.
2004?
Yeah. I became aware of the topic. I was going to say this at 7 o'clock. Well, let's just go as long as we go. And
I told you I'll reset at 7 o'clock.
Reset it. Don't worry about the 7 o'clock thing. When I was in grad school at Purdue, and this was in 1991, we had a once in 500 year event, an ice storm that took down the whole grid from just north of Indianapolis to just south of Chicago. We're talking the high tension systems were collapsing. The towers were collapsing from all the ice. After 5 or 6 days of no power, it got squirrely. And this is a university town, you know? And people started getting weirder and weirder. They were actually blocking power trucks. If the power truck pulled into their street, people would block the truck and say, you can't go until you've hooked us back up. And the guy's trying to explain, hey, look, lady, you know, we got to get the high tension lines. We're just doing local repairs. People were waving $100 bills at him. One driver told me he heard this, yoo-hoo, could you come over here for a minute? And he went to the door, and the woman had no clothes on. And she wasn't there just to give him a couple of cupcakes, you know? This was weird. He said, I'm married, lady, get away from me. It got weird, and so it stuck in the back of my mind. And then as different events happened, when did Katrina happen? 04?
I was going to say 05 maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, about that time. And then I guess I just stumbled across the congressional study, and that started a process that was going to take me to write the first book.
So it wasn't something like, oh, I've heard of EMPs, I know about EMPs, and they're doing a study.
No, I did a lot of research
After
before.
Okay.
Yeah, because, you know, I was trained as a historian, and it's like, go after the facts. Keep digging, 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 until you get the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm. So this is a topic that we've discussed a couple times, but and you've talked with others about it as well. It's a little political, but the Biden-Harris administration announced a $13 billion energy initiative that's part of $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure deal. Of the $13 billion allocated for energy improvements, 11 of it goes to enhance the resilience of the electric infrastructure against extreme weather and cyber attacks. The rest goes to the development of the rest. So it's like $2.5 billion goes to transmission lines, basically to connect regions. Different regions.
Now you're talking 13 billion.
Billion out of 1.2 trillion, and the 11 billion that goes for the infrastructure goes to guard against weather and cyber attacks. Is that adequate? Stop hitting the table. Is that adequate?
So, out of 1.3 trillion, 13 billion, so it's less than 1%.
Yeah, pretty much.
3 or 4 months before the end of the Trump administration, he mandated DOD, DOE, and all the other spaghetti named agencies, whatever, to do a comprehensive on evaluating the threat of EMP and also cyber attack on the grid, all right? It was supposed to be delivered April and May of 2021. Well, guess what happened on the first day of the current administration? Got axed. We're spending over $1 trillion on, and I'm not necessarily against solar, all right? Small is good, I think windmills are crazy. The amount of cost on infrastructure can never be recovered in terms of final energy produced. It's always a zero-sum game. It will cost more to make the darn thing and run it and maintain it than actually will produce the amount of energy. It's like at 0.7 or 0.8. So that's a lost game right there. So we're spending all of this money, but we're not spending it on the basics of the infrastructure. The average component in our electrical grid is about 40 to 50 years old. We're pumping our electricity now on a system from the 1970s, 1980s, and we're degrading the system every day because of the green energy initiative. I just was reading a couple of days ago about a power plant out in California. They're going to dismantle it. Provides enough energy for 200,000 people. It fires on propane. I can deal with that. Where's nukes? Some people might not agree with me, but how many people have died from nuclear energy in an American power plant? It's the old joke. More people have died in the back of Ted Kennedy's car than ever died in a nuclear power plant. It's, and the upgrading on resiliency and safety, we're talking about we need to make small nuke plants, not the giant behemoth giga.
Right.
The type of plant that can provide power for a town about the size of Asheville and the surrounding area. We've been running those systems for 50 years. They're called nuclear aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines.
I believe France is trying some of these now.
Yeah.
Yeah, the smaller micro. I mean, they're not micro. I mean, they're
not micro,
yeah.
But I remember back in the 60s and 70s, the nuclear navy was designed by Rickoffen. All right, Admiral Rickoffen, a genius among geniuses. And he was proposing back then, take the identical design for a nuclear sub. We have thousands of technicians now trained in this from being in the subsurface for 10, 15 years, and put them to work in these power plants across the country for clean, safe energy. We're not doing any of it. So, and then my next question to run over on this, where does about 90% of the key components of our electrical grid come from? Why? Yeah, China. The analogy I give, it's the equivalent of it's December 7th, 1941, the president's meeting with Joint Chiefs of Staff, and one of the generals says, Mr. President, I got a problem here. All our aircraft carriers are made in Japan, all our planes are made in Germany. It's too late at that point. We've lost. We already had a robust, homegrown American industry that really started to pump back up in 1940. That took us to victory in 44 months. Not today.
All right, so it's about 2 minutes until 7, and that's when I think it was supposed to start. No, we're going to put you at the podium. No, we're going to continue this, but I know a lot of people that there was some scheduling mix-ups or miscommunications, so we're not sure if people are still waiting to come in at 7, but at 7 o'clock we were going to sort of reset and focus on the latest book to start with, and then come back into some of this material. And again, if you all have any questions, you can head on down there, fill out or just write a card, just write your question on a card, and I'll go down there and pick them up, and so we can bring them and ask questions to Bill, and we can ask questions that way. You mentioned China. There was a story that, you know who Gordon Chang is? He's a writer. He's also a senior fellow at the Gatestone. And anyway, he quoted Michael Yon, who's a war correspondent. And Michael Yon has been down in Panama at the Darien Pass, I believe it's called, and has seen Chinese nationals are coming through. And these are young, military-aged men. And in one report of his, they had slaughtered a chicken and drank its blood. And that is what PLA, the People's Liberation Army, does. That's one of their rituals. And then they, ate the chicken. But to Jan, like Michael Yon, the correspondent, he's saying these people are on their way up to the border. And so the question then is, what Gordon Chang was suggesting, is it's not a question of if there are saboteurs that have made their way in, it's just a question of how many. And when we saw the shootings at the substations, this is what I thought of. And if it's that easy to take out a substation in Moore County, North Carolina, or two, then do we even need to harden the grid? Because if they could just shoot the substations and we've already let them all in, why even spend the money to do that if we can't protect the substations either? How about that?
Well, the entire electrical grid from top to bottom has to be remade over the next 10 years. It has to be remade. It has to be. Some of you people have heard of Dr. Peter Pry. Peter Pry was the godfather. I always said he was the godfather of this whole issue for the last 30 years. Congressional studies. I remember the first time I met with him, I was the fanboy. Dr. Pry, he passed away about 4 months ago. I think he died in part from just sheer frustration of 30 years of trying to get something done and getting nowhere. Dr. Pry said it would take $3 to $5 billion a year across the next 15 years. I disagree with that. I'd say it's going to be 50 billion. Now we're talking about hardening the grid against EMP strike, which is, you can get quite technical with that in terms of circuit breaking systems, updated SCADAs, things like that. But even things like our local power plants, I got a substation 200 yards below my house. I could go out there tonight and shut it down with half a dozen shots. And it'd be offline for at least a week to 10 days. And I could do it myself. If it happens tonight, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, totally.
But
don't publish that video until weeks later.
You have to improve the signal. I'm not talking about security guards at every one of these things. That's absurd. I think there's a couple 100,000 substations around the country.
Yeah, that's fun.
But armoring them.
Mm-hmm. Or screening them somehow so you don't know what you're shooting at.
Right. Yeah. Screening.
But we won't even, it's like, they're not even doing that.
No, they're not. It's got a big, we as America have a kick me sign on our butts. It's that simple. It says nobody's given us a really good kick yet. The last time they did was 80 years ago. It's going to happen again.
So the name of the piece that I read it was written last month. It's called "China's Saboteurs Are Coming to America," and he says on the first day of war in Asia, say an invasion of Taiwan, Gordon Chang says that these saboteurs can, quote, take down America's power lines, poison the water reserves, assassinate officials, start wildfires, spread pathogens, and create terror by bombing shopping malls and supermarkets. And when I read this piece, you know what I thought of was book, Day of Wrath, with a series of coordinated attacks and the paralyzation that occurs because of people's inability to foresee terrible things that man can do to one another. And so, I guess I may be asking, well, I don't know, how do you get people to to understand that, besides read your books. But I mean, you've talked to Congress before, members of Congress, you've spoken to people in all of these different government agencies and defense agencies, and I just wonder, like, what does it take? Do you know?
Has anybody here read Day of Wrath? Well, on next question. Gods. Well, I want to talk about that for a minute. Day of Wrath was yet another book that I tell people it's like God's. I believe that God judges me in some ways or other for the good, and Day of Wrath was one of those books. It was 2014, and you might recall that summer ISIS was on the way up, and our administration was even refusing to address it as ISIS. What were they calling it? IS or something? Or
ISIL?
Yeah.
No?
And our administration said they're the JV team.
Yeah.
Yeah, the president said they're the JV team. And now, all your major networks were showing some film footage of they were calling them alleged executions. Well, it doesn't take an idiot more than 5 minutes of doing just a little delving. I finally got on to the actual ISIS sites. It took me 5 or 10 minutes. And for the next couple hours, I was just watched them, and I was crying at one point. Especially this one man where they were cutting his head off. An 8-year-old boy was cutting his head off, and the man was screaming, and then they twisted his head around backwards. And they thought it was funny. Women being executed, the River of Blood, where they estimate they killed about 1,000 people because they wanted to turn the river red. And I started thinking about, could that happen here? And yes, the answer is yes. Because how many are familiar with the Beslan scenario? Okay. In 2004 in Beslan, it's in Chechnya, which is part of the Russian republics, terrorists seized a school on the first day. They murdered over 200 children in one day, well, 3 days. They were taking 10 and 11-year-old girls and dragging them up onto the roof, raping them, and then cutting their throats so that the newsreel would see this. If that can happen there, it can happen here. And so my postulation on one's Day of Wrath was, if you hit only 3 or 4 schools with 3 professionals in each school, within 10 minutes you're going to kill 150 to 200 children in these gun-free zones. We're not talking about the lone shooter idiot. We're talking about 3 trained professionals. What would happen to America, at the end of that day? Think about it. The utter chaos. If we thought 9/11 was bad, when they go after our children, at the end of that day, every school in the country will be shut down for weeks. The country will be in turmoil. We'll have to have military, at every school. We're so God-blessed, idiotically stupid at times when it comes to, we just assume it's all going to keep going this way. There's an old saying, God looks out for drunks, fools, the United States of America. So I've been lucky so far, and so have a lot of other people. But evil is just below the surface, and satanic evil is there. 10, 12 people could cripple this country.
Well, I think that's a lot of time. I've said this over the years, which is I think a lot of quote-unquote conspiracy theories, that the ones that don't turn out to be true, obviously, but the ones that there aren't proof for, that it's a way that people try to make sense of the idea that so few people can actually wreak that much havoc, because that is terrifying. And when you look around and you realize there's sort of a normalcy bias going on, right? It's like, oh, I heard fireworks go off. No, why would fireworks be going off inside the school? Those are gunshots, and people it doesn't click, it doesn't register. And it seems like that's what we are as an entire society.
It happened on my campus.
Fireworks?
No,
Oh.
pistol shots.
Mhm.
It was 10 years ago. I was on, how many of you know Montreat? Is it a great school or is it a great school? I've been there for 30 years. I thank God every day He has put me at Montreat. Well, I'm walking into Belk, the main classroom building, and I saw a student walk past who was a kid with a lot of troubles. We knew that. And I even thought, why is Jason on campus? I went into the mailroom, and about 10 or 15 seconds later, pop, pop, pop. 3 pistol shots. The mailroom clerk went to open the door. What was that? And I'm screaming at him, get back from the door, lock the door, go out the other way, And everybody was coming out of the hallways. What's that? They were going out the side doors. What's that? And I cracked the door, a side door. I could smell the cordite. And what am I going to do? 3 pistol shots, smell the cordite. We're on a college campus. That's it. It's over with. This is the big game. And I'm not going to talk about whether I was going to run to my car or not to get something. But there was a hall phone. Grabbed the hall phone. Yelled, this is Forstchen down in Belk. There's a shooter on campus. And the woman laughed. He said, oh, Bill, don't worry. It was just a police officer. We had a rabid raccoon, so we were thinking that he was trying to shoot him. And I'm like... And then about a half hour later, I get the president wants to see you. I went in, he set me down. He said, is it true that you were yelling at people going, you stupid blank, blank, blank. Get the blank out that blanking door now. Because if anybody with military training knows, a little bit, you have to use a shock factor at times. You have to shock people into realizing this is a deadly serious situation and then get the blank out. And I said, yeah, I blank and said blank. And he said, just go home. Just go home. And you know what? I was at a training scenario about 3-4 years ago. I was the victim. And by the end of it, I was just shaking my head. And this was the SWAT team. From the moment of the alleged call until SWAT arrived on our campus was half an hour. So, I'm not segueing into school shootings and such, but the normalcy bias. That moment of we can't quite grasp the fact that this is real and this is happening.
Well, this goes to sheepdogs, and wolves also, right? You've got most members of society that are, and this is not pejorative, right? It's just that they're productive members of society. They get along with everybody. They kind of move around. They eat a lot of grass, I guess. But then you get the sheepdogs that protect them, but they look a little bit like wolves to the sheep. And you need the sheepdogs because they're the ones that, yes, bark at every single noise at the perimeter in the dark, but they also know that there are wolves out there. And you are acting as a sheepdog, and that the people that have that sort of normalcy bias, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just they've never been. There was Bob Plyler, the late Bob Plyler. He used to talk to me about you revert to your last level of training, and so most people don't have any kind of training in that kind of a scenario.
Well, the whole thing is, it's almost like you got to shift from first gear over to reverse in 1 second. Okay, you got to go the other way now. And I'm always, things like this, I'm always telling people, be a little bit situationally aware. Hi, Mary. Where do I sit when we go into a restaurant?
Near the door.
Near the door, that I can see the door. I just can't help it. I'm situationally aware. And she's like, what are you worried about? I said, you never know. So, little things like that. You got to be more situationally aware, but the United States needs to be more situationally aware.
Yeah. So, all right, these are heavy subjects. So let me shift into reverse.
Too heavy.
What do you do to unplug? You look at all this stuff. You do all of this research. What do you do to clear your own mind?
I drink.
Besides that.
No. I did once. All right, and I had to stop that. The doodles. Which doodles? What?
Doodles.
Yeah, well, Mary is my other half here, and we have 2 golden doodles.
Oh, I thought you were talking about drawing. I thought you did doodles.
No, 2 crazy doodles, Chloe and Abby, and they are laughs in the evening, and also they protect us from the bears. We have 4 bears in the area, 3 cubs and a mama, and they bark like crazy until the bears get too close to the house and they run and hide in the bedroom. But at least they've given us warning beforehand. So you got to get on with your life. I'd have to say I was always worried slightly about Peter Pry, because it's not like he was going to go crazy, but he was so mono-focused on this is the issue, this is the issue. And I was sort of like, there's a lot of other things in life to make us happy as well.
I don't know if there were any questions that are dropped down at the table. I guess I could ask Christy, you want to go take a look and see if there are any? I don't know. I haven't been watching. I apologize. But if there are, if you want to bring them up. So I may have gotten a sample of this, but what kind of music do you like? What kind of music do you listen to?
I actually listen to Gregorian chant.
Oh my God, of course you do.
I love it. And I saw an article recently, it's this movie, The Pope's Exorcist and such, how Satan supposedly despises Gregorian chant. I don't know why, but you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Gregorian chant, New Age music, Vangelis, classical, Aaron Copland.
Do you play any instruments?
Yeah, kazoo.
The kazoo. Do you have a favorite song?
Oh, you know, a friend of mine, their little boy just started taking guitar lessons a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I was such a bloody idiot at that age. I wound up with the baritone horn. How many chicks are you going to pick up playing the baritone horn? If only I had learned to play the guitar and could sing Michael Rowe, Your Boat Is Shore, I would have been surrounded by hippie chicks. And so, no, I could play a harmonica, you know.
Oh, well, that's
about it.
Yeah.
And what was the next one?
Your favorite, I asked your favorite song.
Simple Gifts.
But,
Do you know it?
No.
It's a gift to be simple, it's a gift to be free. Da 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 da. Aaron Copland used it in Appalachian Spring. And it's a beautiful song. Ashokan Farewell. That one always brings me to tears, associated with the Civil War. I like period music like that.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the new book now.
The new book.
Right. So,
Well,
yeah.
Maybe somebody has a question about the old book.
Well, are there any questions down there? She's saying no. Okay, so I asked
Okay,
every
be
question.
that way.
Well, no, I'm going to get back to the old book. I'm going to
Okay.
circle back, like Jen Psaki. I'm going to circle back. So the new book. I was under the impression. I mentioned this earlier. I was under the impression that the final day was the final day. And then it's not the final day. And I
No,
feel
it's
like,
not.
is this like introducing the kid into the sitcom, and then you know it's like, oh man, they introduced the baby into the sitcom, and now it's not gonna.
Oh, really?
They're
No,
like,
I didn't introduce any babies.
it's like jumping the shark or
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
now.
yeah.
Okay, so what is, because I haven't read it yet. I just got my copy tonight. So
Tell me
a fourth?
Why?
Yeah.
Why? I finished the final day in what, 2015? Yeah.
I didn't write it.
I forget.
Okay.
You know? And then I wrote 48 Hours, which was a fun, interesting. 48 Hours is about the last 48 hours of humanity. It started with the question: if we all had only 48 hours left, what will we do? And that's not a depressing book at all in some ways. I think it's trying to celebrate the better angels of our nature, as Abraham Lincoln said. Well, I went for several years. My publisher would call me up every 3 months and say, Bill, we really want another book. And I go, no. And then finally, as said in the movie The Godfather, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in again.
Right.
They made me an offer I couldn't refuse.
Well, that's better than the alternative. I was thinking it was a misery type of scenario where somebody kidnapped you and made you write it for them. That's better.
That is the most scary movie for any writer.
For any writer.
And when anybody walks up to me and says, I'm your #1 fan, I'm just like, really? Really?
So was it difficult to write this, thinking, or had you had ideas kind of percolating in your brain about loose ends from the series, the trilogy, that you were like, you know what, I can actually explore more of these things?
Mary, did I have a difficult time? No?
Oh, she says no.
Oh, she's so supportive.
So you think you did have a hard time?
Let's just say it was 9 months late.
Is that long in publishing world?
Kind of. It was a hard book to write because there's a wonderful old saying from the Duke of Earl, no, Lord Wellington at the Battle of Waterloo when he was asked how did he win. And he said, well, they came at us in the same old way, and we just shot them down in the same old way. I didn't want the book to turn into that.
Mm-hmm.
Just shoot them down again. But what type of plot line do I have? So about 2 or 3 things finally became the plot, which I really don't want to go into.
That's fine. That's fine.
But I'll give one giveaway here. I did kill a major character at the very end of the book. The Etzel. The Etzel finally gives up the ghost. And that's at the very end of the book. If you got a copy, it's like John looks at Michaela and he goes, I think the car is dead. And it is. But yeah, if I played any current event, it was the whole thing about COVID. Which is, for how we see what happened there. So plague is a factor in this book. And how does a post-modern, post-apocalypse society deal with bubonic plague? That could be the death knell of everything, because pneumonic bubonic plague in its most virulent form is 90% fatal. And the infection rate is at least 50%. It's terrifying. So I put that into the book as well. I always love having happy subjects.
Yeah, no, I can tell. That's why I asked how you unplug. Did you even answer that?
No.
No. Do you unplug?
Yeah.
He who stops to sharpen his axe cuts more wood.
You know one of my favorite things now? Mary and I in the evening, we love watching old episodes of Soupy Sales and White Fang. If any of you remembered Soupy Sales, you laughed my butt off with that guy in White Fang. That sounds dumb. I love old movies.
But that's the point of checking out. That's the point of giving the brain a rest. You just like sometimes it's good to spin wrenches. It's fine.
Yeah, it's I just love old movies, comedies, things like that, and also period dramas.
Yeah.
Good Bible epic. So I'm always up for that. Exodus or something, or Ten Commandments. I always love that movie.
We were talking earlier before the program, and I asked you if you had watched or heard of Jordan Peterson, and he's actually doing something on Exodus. It's available and it's free on YouTube, and they actually break down line by line Exodus with biblical scholars, and it's done in a sort of round table chat format. It's excellent. Anyway, so
Jordan Peterson is quite a voice.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
Yes.
One of the questions you always get whenever anybody is talking about this series, do you want to guess what it is? When is it going to be a movie? When is it going to be turned into a TV series? Why can't it come out in...
And whenever you've asked me that on the radio, my response has always been, do you have your finger on the Tourette button? Because I'm about to let go. Those of you familiar with it, it's called option hell. You get option, they give you a nice check, and then they go on their way. I've been getting options for 20 years. Actually, my old science fiction series got optioned by Ted, what was his name? Cruz?
Tom Cruise?
Tom Cruise, not Ted Cruz, yeah. Tom
No, I don't know if Ted Cruz is making movies these
Who is
days.
Ted Cruz?
The senator from Texas.
Oh, no, that
Ran
guy
for
isn't-
president.
Yeah, that guy isn't doing it. It's Tom
No,
Cruise.
Tom Cruise.
But
Still making movies.
I got really close 3 years back, and in fact, the producer and I, he wanted to produce, and he was getting the money together. It was going to be a fairly low budget, and he wanted me to come out to Montana, where he lived, and he was a pilot, and he turned left instead of right one day. Went into in a fog bank, and he got disoriented and was killed. So that ended that hope. The current Starling Productions, you know, the guy who is the major screenwriter has made more money than I do. You know, Hollywood, they throw $1 million at a screenwriter to write a 60-page screen treatment. It drives you crazy. The first treatment, let's just say it's gone through 3 treatments, and now because of the strike, you know, the WGA strike, did the actors settle yet?
No.
Okay, so that has messed everything up. I'll just give one example. And sarcastic one day I made a comment, why don't we put a cruise ship into this story, get it EMP'd, and it can be the Love Boat from Hell. And the guy actually said, that's a pretty good idea.
Well, you know where the guy who made New Coke went, I guess.
Well, you know okay, a sexist joke. Oh God, it's a sexist joke. Can I do that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not in charge of the property.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know I can.
How badly
Okay.
do you want to get canceled?
How bad do we want to get canceled? You heard about the dumb blonde in Hollywood. She was so stupid she dated the book writer. That's a real joke to us.
In Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah,
Because the writers... So when they say that you have the option, that you got option, you're in option hell, like somebody paid you money essentially to buy
The idea.
the idea, so you can't shop it to anybody else.
Right.
It's the way that they knock out you as a competitor.
Right.
And so the idea then is to know who's actually serious about making it into a movie or a series or whatever.
And the 2 or 3 options back, that was definitely the case. They were optioning me to just shelve it because they were working on a separate idea. There was a TV series some years ago, I think it was called Jericho.
Yeah.
And one of my students actually was working as an assistant there, and one day said to the director or producer or whatever that this seems awful similar in some ways to 1 Second After. The guy freaked on him. Said, never mention that around here. But then again, Jericho turned out to be an idiot tale.
Well, yeah, my wife and I watched it. We enjoyed the program, and then they pulled the plug on it. It seemed like people reacted very negatively, and then they kind of did like half of a season.
Well, they said nanobots had caused
I don't even know.
blackout. It was just, it's amazing how dumb they can be.
It's Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we have some questions here from people, and I will try my best to read the handwriting and to give the right emphasis to the words in your questions. So let me start with the first one that came in.
You're going to do it dramatically?
I also believe in solar power. Just for the record, I have solar panels on my
Yeah,
roof as well.
I have no problem with that.
Right, I mean, I'll be the first target in the neighborhood when the power goes out. They'll
Yeah,
be
we'll
like,
throw rocks at your panels, yeah.
all right, so I also believe in solar power, but what do you think about the geoengineering / dimming the sun, and this administration admitting they are going to do it when it has been going on for years?
Does that give you a reaction?
It doesn't give me an answer. You gave me a reaction. I did get the reaction. Now, look, I have long maintained that the sun is trying to kill us. That has been my position for years. With the skin cancer, with the solar flares. So, like, I'm on board with an idea of, like Monty Burns from The Simpsons, to put up the big disc and cover the sun, and then, yeah, I'm all right, I'm thinking that's
It's not, you know, remember the old adage, it's not wise to fool with Mother Nature.
Well,
You know, come on. It's called unintended consequences, all right? You create a situation with just because of A, we're going to use B. So we do B, but nobody's thinking that that might devolve into A, B, or, you know, W, or whatever. There's too many variables in it, and that scares the dickens out of me. And the fact that the current administration would even talk about it is enough to drive me crazy.
well, it's the fatal conceit of man. It's
Yes.
this hubris that oh well, we can, if we can, like, I think the idea was, I think I know what you're talking about.
Thousands of planes.
Put like clouds or something to mask some of the rays of the sun or something.
Actually, to put thousands of planes up into the upper atmosphere to dump fluorocarbons that would create a pole around the Earth sufficient to drop the solar radiation hitting the Earth's surface. And if I think anything is a major factor, we're in a major solar cycle right now. The solar cycle does heat up the atmosphere a bit. And I think that's more of a factor than anything else at the moment. One good volcanic explosion, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we go to Krakatoa and just start hitting it?
Just chuck some dynamite down
Yes,
there.
chuck dynamite
Yeah.
into, no, put a nuke in it.
There you go.
Blow it up with a 50 megaton warhead.
Nuclear waste. Dump all of the waste in there,
Yeah,
and then just see what
I got
happens.
it.
Yeah, why not? What could go wrong?
what idiots.
Yeah. Still, the sun is trying to kill us. Anyway, next
No,
up.
it's not. It's
Yeah, I
our
think it is.
friend.
How bad could getting even get after Teo? T-E-O? I'm from Eastern Kentucky. How bad could getting even get after T-E-O?
Getting even with what?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know if I...
Teotwaki.
What?
Teotwaki.
The end of the world as we know it.
Oh! The end of the world as we know, that's right.
How bad could getting even get after Teotwaki? Is that right?
You mentioned in your book about people, one of the books about people getting even on scores after.
Oh, yeah.
Gotcha. Right, gotcha. So yeah, 48 hours, you got 48 hours, just go start getting even with everybody?
Yeah. Yeah,
How bad
48
did that-
hours, I even mentioned that.
Right.
There's going to be people out there to do that. You know, I've told Mary this, I tell my daughter that. There's sometimes, if this thing happened, I'm afraid I'm going to look out on my driveway, and it'll be like the movie Frankenstein. You know, crowd coming up my driveway carrying torches. You know, he's the monster. He's the one who thought it up. I've actually had some people tell me that because I wrote the book, that gives bad guys ideas. And I'm like, I think they thought of it before I did the book. Yeah, there's always going to be people wanting to get even. I can think of one or two myself.
There's almost that line of argument. There is merit to it in a social contagion sense.
Well, you're sounding
Right.
very educated.
Well, thank you. And so, from a social contagion standpoint, this is like mass shootings, school shootings. Before Columbine, people couldn't even comprehend that somebody could do that. Then when somebody saw someone else do it, now it became something that someone else could do. Goes to like a sociologist back in the 60s who was doing studies on riots, and everybody has a number. And so when you throw a rock through a window, your number is 0, because you didn't need anybody to do that first. But my number might be 1. I see you, you're 0, you throw it through, now my number is hit, I throw a rock, and somebody else's number is 2. So they see 2 people do it, now they throw rocks, and it proceeds as such. And so if the 48-hour window, that it basically shatters those constraints, now anything is possible.
Especially if you suddenly realize there's only 2 days left.
Right.
Though I believe that 95% of our society would go quietly. You know, because I interviewed so many people over this book. I just asked them, I said, what would you do if you had 48 hours? And almost everybody says the same thing. I want to be with my loved ones. I want to be with my daughter, want to be with my parents, want to be with my friends. I don't think there's malice, but the 2 to 5% of our population that is filled with malice can do an awful lot of mayhem.
On the plus side, they'd only have 2 days to do it. So like large scale things, they would probably be somewhat restricted from getting access to the stuff to do a large scale. They'd have to, go and hit everybody individually.
Well, it was funny because I asked some people, what would you do? And, I had people say I'd steal a Lamborghini. And I'm thinking, I might want to steal a P-51 Mustang, rack it up to 30,000 feet, roll it into, downward and whatever.
I'm just saying the junk food aisle is going to be just wiped
Yeah,
out.
wiped out.
Wiped out, yeah. All right, here you go. Here's a hanging curveball for you. Have you ever been accused of wearing a tinfoil hat?
Well, at least I've not been accused of wearing women's underwear. No, it's just, no.
Well, do you wear a tinfoil hat?
Oh, no, I've been accused lots of times. I remember early on, I was doing an interview, and it was a station in Phoenix. And we've gotten to know each other since then. I'm on his show a time or two a year. And he did say, yeah, Bill, you do sound like tinfoil hat. And they went to a break, and the weather forecast, another typical day in Phoenix, low of 87 tonight, high of 111 tomorrow. And when I came back on, I said, so it's going to be 111 tomorrow. Suppose the air conditioners don't work anymore. Don't work for a week. What will happen? And that was almost like a stall for him. He says, my God, yeah. We couldn't go a week without electricity in the summer. Thousands of people would die.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to go back to the blocking out of the sun idea that some geniuses are contemplating, what happens to the areas, to unintended consequences, these areas of the planet that are already very cold. There are people, there's a fella that I follow, and he lives in like Iowa or something, and he's like always complaining. He says he wants more global warming, please, because his winters are brutally cold, and so what happens to all of those areas that are right now on the chilly side, and now you block the sun, and now what happens to all of those folks?
And if any of you are familiar with the Club of Rome or the Society of Rome? What is it? I'm asking you.
It's a secret society.
Well, it's not secret.
We know about it. No.
It's supposedly a collection of 500 to 700 of the world's top experts on a lot of different things. And they came out with their first report, I think it was in 1972, report from the Society of Rome. And one of the things they were talking about was climate-wise, between 1982 and 1985, what was going to happen?
The Ice Age.
Ice Age. Mm-hmm. I thought that was kind of cool, because I love skiing then. Wake up one morning, there's woolly mammoths running down the street, Big glacier comes along, and everything goes. That real, all joking aside, that was the consensus in 1970. That we were putting so much pollutants into the atmosphere, it was blocking, so that was going to do us. How long was oil going to last? In 1970, how long? 15 years. 15 years we were at zero oil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and so on the conspiracy theory charge that is, and people use the term tinfoil hat wearing, and I've said it too, the whole point is, we joke about it, but it's to dismiss rather than confront. Right. And I will discuss, quote unquote conspiracy theories with other people, but what I require is evidence, and I don't, I want you to make the case, and making the case is not asking me questions, right? That's what I require. So I don't approach things from a tinfoil hat pejorative, because that is how it is used. People do not want to confront. This is normalcy bias again, right? This is, you're saying things that are making me uncomfortable and scared, like we were talking about China sending these military-age guys that are engaging in behaviors that their PLA officers engage in, or service members engage in, and sending them across our border. What are they going to be doing here? And if I can imagine what they're going to be doing here, do you think China hasn't imagined what they could be doing here? So what are we doing to stop that? Apparently we're giving them a cell phone and a bus ticket and
Sending them on their way.
sending them on their way.
Well, we'll fly them there now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll fly you there.
Right, so that then obviously that prompts the question of why and who's allowing it and how could they be that stupid, and then the natural tendency is to reassess your assumption because the conclusion doesn't make any sense, and you're saying, well, my assumption was that they would want to prevent it, but now if you reassess that to think they want it to occur, boom, there you are. But that's how the theory goes, but where's the proof? And I don't know how you get at that proof on that topic specifically. On the grid stuff, I don't know. I like to chalk it up to incompetence because that's government, but
You know, as you're saying this, I'm thinking of the book Animal Farm. And remember, the animals were first, if you've read Animal Farm or whatever, and the animals take over and they're forming a perfect society. It's a course about Stalin, Trotsky, and others. But a crucial moment there is that they're first saying that 4 legs are good,
2 legs bad.
2 legs bad. And then suddenly the pigs start walking around. And they finally, the geese and the ducks and the sheep, who are the masses, they're all chanting together, 2 legs good, 2 legs good, 2 legs good. And it's like, we have a society where people are just like chanting some of this stuff.
Because I think it's easy to get swept along and stuff. If the last 3 years hasn't proven that, I'm not sure what else could. Right? I mean, it's
Right.
very easy to go along, get swept along, rely on experts and people that, once again, we assumed that our institutions and the people in them were, we're looking out for our interests, their interests, and American interests. And I think a lot of people got disabused of that. I think that's a very, very big problem. Very big problem. All right, so this person also wanted to thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so, are there any other questions? Anything else anybody wants to ask us? It's about 20 till 8. I mean, I can keep
Oh
talking.
gosh, we've been going.
Yeah. Say that.
You want to wrap it up in 5 minutes so we can get home?
Sounds
10
good.
minutes?
All right. So, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want to cover that you think is important or interesting for folks to know about the book or about the series? And
Yeah.
when it's going to be a movie? No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
I suddenly thought of the old Abbott and Costello routine. Slowly, step by step.
Stooges.
Yeah, the Stooges did it as well, both Abbott and Costello and the Stooges.
You've got a question down here?
Yeah,
The pink shirt lady.
the pink shirt lady.
Pink shirt lady?
Peach shirt. Ask me
Peach
about-
shirt, sorry.
Peach shirt.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say, I read 1 second after shortly, you said it came out in 2017?
No, 1 second after it came out in 2009.
Okay, well, so I read it a couple years after it had been out, and I have to say, I was just thinking about Perfect back then, but the insight that you gave, I mean, just reading it, I thought, oh my gosh, I never thought about this or that. It's incredible how you were able to cultivate the entire book and just bring out these things that, the insulin thing with no refrigeration for one thing. And that was what got me started about medications. What are we gonna do? We can't get our medications anymore. So anyway, I wanted to commend you, whatever that means, that it was just a remarkable job.
Thank you.
You must have really researched and thought about all the possibilities because they were there.
Well, I think I mentioned earlier that I was at a graduation ceremony.
Well, not today, but I know that, yes, yeah, this is how you came to write about it.
Yeah, I was at a graduation ceremony and it was scalding hot and I was like about ready to pass out because the graduation speaker was droning on and on and on. And then I looked out at the audience, which were my students from Montreat, and it was a God moment. It was just like, I'm going to write about them. I'm going to write about, I still point to the right side, my dear friend Andy Andrews, D-Day vet, Omaha Beach. I'm going to write about him. I'm going to write about the chief of police. So, well, I'll talk about that for 2 minutes. I started interviewing a lot of people. And just 2 or 3 quick stories. I sat down with the chief of police, who was a good friend, Jack Staggs. And I laid out the scenario. The electricity goes off, it's not going to come back on. What do you do? I'll never forget, Jack picked up the phone, and he looked at me and he said, blank, the phones don't work. Right. What about my radios? Chances are they don't work. What about the cars? They're not going to work. And Jack it was interesting watching him struggle to redefine how he thinks for what has to be done next. And so I'd always hit people with the same question. When I went to the nursing home, I was horrified. My father was in a nursing home at the time, last month of his life, and I always assumed nursing homes had a big cistern out back for extra water and a really good backup generating system. Well, no, their generator is hot wired in. They got enough fuel for, I think, 12 or 24 hours. But if they're hot wired on to the main circuit, that generator will be blown off as well. And suddenly the woman, she was in tears. She said, we get our medication on only a daily or like 3 times a week because you don't want to keep hard narcotics in a nursing home because the bad guys are going to be there. So what happens? What happens to my father? My father was on a respirator at times. And it finally became, well, we could give him bottled oxygen, but when that runs out, squeeze ball. Until I get too tired. We had a bad hurricane that year. The nursing home calls me up, says, can you help? So I drove down to the supply truck in the center of Black Mountain. And Black Mountain is a wonderful town, all right? I've lived there for 30 years. And I couldn't believe it when I got out of the car and it was still pouring. And I stand on line, I get up to the pickup truck, and the guy is saying 1 gallon per person per family. And I said, I need 50 gallons. And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, I'm from the nursing home, Mountain Ridge. We got 50 people there. Can I have a gallon for each? The people behind me freaked out. The people online. Who the hell are you? I said, and the chief of police actually said, Bill's, he's a professor here. Well, I don't give a blank, He only gets 1 gallon. Give him 2. He's not going to get 50 gallons. And it turned into a big argument. And I was thinking, suppose this was really real. Chief finally gave me 24 gallons of water and 6, whatever. And he was like, get out of here now and don't come back. I go to the pharmacy. That was another woman in tears. I realized vets are the number 1 people you want to protect. Vets and dentists. Because they have anesthesia. Your typical doctor's office no longer has any of that. And so I just interviewed more and more and more people. I interviewed dozens of people, and I gradually stitched the story together, trying to put all their different reactions and all that into the tale.
Did anybody say no? Like, did you get people that didn't want to talk with you about this stuff?
No. But more than a few people got upset because they would suddenly say to me, I never thought about this. Mm-hmm. The pharmacist, she was in tears. She said, what do I do? And she starts running down a list I hadn't even thought about. Medication for pancreatic enzyme disorder, medication, well, we were just talking earlier, what would happen to Josh if...
A mutual friend of ours who has kidney
Waiting for a
failure.
kidney. He'd be dead in 2 weeks. What would, without dialysis on top of it. So all of these things just became embedded in my mind to stitch together a story. But what I was trying to do was to write a very simple story. Nothing super dramatic. Those who might notice a couple technical details, I totally skip over the big battle that used to be somewhat obligatory. It's just before the battle and then after the battle. It's the aftermath that I wanted. What happens to a child? Mary and I were just talking about this today. Somehow the topic of Mary Kay came up. I hope you don't mind if I take a minute, even though it's about Mary Kay.
That's okay.
I was director of admissions at a boarding school many years ago. Mother and her little boy came in, and I fell in love with this kid. I still remember his name, Eric. He was in 6th grade. I wanted him for the boarding school, and we signed him up. She called me up about 2 weeks later. She was in tears and said, I'm going to have to pull him out. And I was like, why? He's been diagnosed with a brain tumor. Well, what happened to her was this. About 2 hours, how many of you have ever heard what Mary Kay used to do? Don't ever, somebody shows up at your doorstep with Mary Kay, buy something. Because this woman, Mary Kay, called this woman up about 2 hours later, and it turns out she does this with all her employees. She said, any medical bills, anything, Eric needs to go anywhere in the world for his treatment, I take care of it. Send the bills to me. She must have spent $1 million on little Eric before the end. And that's, I remember seeing a big article on how that was Mary Kay. That's what she did. But how did that affect me? I watched him die. I was at his funeral, and I still have a hard time talking about it. But I channeled that into my part of my story about Jennifer. So a lot of different people. If all I am is I'm just a recorder, you know. I don't have any great talent. It's just God gave me a story. Told me to go write it.
Earlier, I thanked everybody who had made the event here tonight possible. I thanked the Starretts, the presenters, the educators, the vendors. But I also want to thank Dr. Bill Forstchen, a man who has a heart for teaching. He has a talent for storytelling. He's got the mind for researching. And he has the strength to explore truly horrific acts of man and the courage to stand and to speak of them, so that we all may be as prepared for whatever trials we may face. And so I appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you for your friendship.
I
and thank you for
appreciate
this.
you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Dr. Bill Forstchen.
Well, if anybody wants a book signed, we still have
Head on
some.
down there. Does anybody else want their book signed? Dr. Bill can get on down there and sign your book. Thank you for coming. Thank you, everybody.